On a winter evening in 1943, Nikola Tesla died alone in room 3327 of the New Yorker hotel. The man who helped illuminate the modern world spent his final years in a faded Manhattan tower that had once claimed to be the tallest hotel on Earth. His body lay undiscovered for a day behind a "Do Not Disturb" sign. When staff finally entered, they found him in bed, hands folded, arranged with deliberate precision. Within hours, the FBI arrived to seize his papers. The hotel continued operating as if nothing had happened. The building had promised permanence and delivered something far more fragile. It rose during excess, aged through depression and war, and became a refuge for the desperate and the eccentric. To understand Tesla's death is to understand the hotel itself, and that hotel did not exist until 1929. New York City in the 1920s was locked in a vertical race no one could win. Each year brought taller structures. Steel frames climbed higher into the skyline. Developers competed for records that would be broken within months. Construction crews worked through winter winds to add floors that briefly claimed the title of tallest before another tower surpassed them. The skyline never stood still. Hotels joined the competition with particular intensity. As Manhattan became the commercial center of the world, business travelers and tourists required rooms within walking distance of rail terminals and theaters. The Hotel McAlpin opened in 1912 with 500 rooms. The Hotel Pennsylvania followed in 1919 with 200 rooms. Each declared itself the largest hotel in the world, and each was correct until the next giant opened its doors. The boom had logic behind it. Prohibition in the United States began in 1920, yet Manhattan remained America's entertainment capital. Broadway theaters filled nightly. Jazz drifted from basement speakeasies. Wealthy visitors arrived at Pennsylvania Station, needing accommodations nearby. Business conventions packed ballrooms for weeks at a time. Demand appeared endless. Developers borrowed heavily. Banks competed to finance projects that promised steady returns from room rates, restaurants, and retail leases. The arithmetic seemed simple. A 2,000-room hotel charging $3 a night could repay construction loans within a decade. After that, profits would flow. Matt Canner recognized the opportunity. Having built apartment houses and commercial properties across Manhattan, he began assembling parcels along 8th Avenue between 34th and 35th Streets in 1927. The location offered strategic advantages. Pennsylvania Station lay 2 blocks south. The garment district surrounded the site, bringing thousands of workers and buyers each day. The land was costly but available. Canner hired the architectural firm Sugarman and Berger and brought in Ralph Thomas Walker as consulting architect. Walker had designed the New York Telephone Company, building in a bold Art Deco style that fused modern materials with decorative character. He would define the exterior identity of the new hotel. The design called for a 43-story tower rising from a base that filled the entire block. It would contain 503 rooms, surpassing the Hotel Pennsylvania to become the largest in the world. More importantly, it would rise 512 feet from street to roof, making it the tallest hotel structure on Earth. Height signaled ambition in a city where ambition was currency. Walker clad the exterior in brick, concentrating Art Deco ornament at the crown. Terracotta panels depicted stylized eagles in geometric forms. Setbacks required by zoning laws emphasized vertical lines that pulled the eye upward. The building would stand visible from blocks away. a beacon to travelers stepping off trains or taxis. Construction began in 1928. Existing buildings were demolished before excavation could start. Foundations were poured to bear extraordinary weight. Once complete, the steel frame climbed rapidly. Observers watched from neighboring rooftops as crews added floor upon floor with astonishing speed. Inside, the ambitions were even greater. Every room would have a private bathroom, still a luxury at the time. Each would include a radio, a rare innovation. Ice water would flow on tap through a centralized refrigeration system. Cork and mineral wool insulation provided soundproofing between rooms. The hotel would include multiple restaurants, vast ballrooms, barber shops, beauty parlors, a hospital floor with operating rooms, and even a basement printing plant capable of producing menus and promotional materials. It was conceived as a vertical city where guests could arrive and never leave for any service. Financing came through a complex web of mortgages and bonds. Construction costs approached $23 million, reflecting the building's scale and advanced systems. Investors expected steady returns and profitability within a decade. By early 1929, the steel skeleton stood complete. Windows were installed through spring and summer. Interior finishes advanced on lower floors, while upper levels were still being enclosed. The schedule pressed forward. Canner intended to open before year's end to capture the winter convention season. October 1929 arrived with warning signs. The stock market faltered on October 24. Panic accelerated. By October 29, the crash was complete. Billions in paper wealth disappeared. Banks faced cascading defaults. The economic boom that had fueled hotel construction vanished almost overnight. Canner had little choice but to continue. The project was too advanced to abandon. An unfinished hotel generated no revenue. An open one at least offered a chance. Construction continued. The grand opening was set for January 2, 1930. Despite spreading anxiety, crowds attended the gala. Guests toured the towering structure. Orchestras played in the ballrooms. Reporters examined the mechanical systems and praised the novelty of ice water on tap. Radios in every room impressed visitors, who still regarded broadcasting as new. The building displayed everything modern engineering could provide. At 512 feet, it stood as the tallest hotel in the world. The claim was accurate. Yet as unemployment rose and businesses shuttered across Manhattan, the triumph felt hollow. The New Yorker had opened at precisely the wrong moment in history. Early months tested every assumption behind its construction. Occupancy lagged. Convention bookings shrank as companies cut travel budgets. Restaurant revenues declined. The Great Depression struck with speed and severity, and hotels felt the impact immediately. The New Yorker endured through reputation and location. It was new, modern, and imposing. Guests who could still afford Manhattan chose it for its innovations. The radio in every room became a defining marketing point. Private bathrooms and ice water justified slightly higher rates. By the end of 1930, the hotel stood as a monument to ambition and catastrophic timing. It was the tallest hotel in a city where survival mattered more than height. Throughout the early 1930s, rates dropped across Manhattan as competition intensified. Empty rooms yielded nothing regardless of grandeur. Management responded with aggressive marketing. Advertisements emphasized modern conveniences, unavailable elsewhere. Travel guides highlighted the ice water on tap, and in-room radios. The building adapted to a harsher era, standing tall above 8th Avenue. waiting for prosperity to return while sheltering thousands within its walls, including, years later, the solitary inventor who would take his final breath behind a quiet door. The private bathrooms, still uncommon in older hotels, gave the New Yorker hotel a decisive advantage among guests who could afford to choose. Convention business brought stability during uncertain years. Trade associations and professional organizations continued holding annual meetings despite the Depression. They required large venues with ballrooms and dining facilities capable of serving hundreds at once. The New Yorker's scale worked in its favor. It could host events smaller hotels had to refuse. Engineering conventions, medical associations, and business groups filled rooms and restaurants simultaneously during multi-day gatherings. The hotel strengthened its position through a connection to radio broadcasting. NBC established studios inside the building shortly after opening. Performers and technical staff passed through its doors daily. Live broadcasts originated from the hotel, giving it nationwide publicity beyond the reach of paid advertising. Listeners across the country heard announcers identify their location as the New Yorker Hotel in New York City. The association with modern broadcasting reinforced the building's identity as a symbol of technological progress. The systems inside the structure justified that reputation. A centralized refrigeration plant delivered ice water to 503 rooms, an engineering feat few buildings attempted. Heating and cooling systems provided comfort superior to older competitors. The electrical infrastructure supported radios, lighting, elevators, and mechanical equipment throughout a 43-story tower without the frequent failures common in earlier high-rises. Innovation demanded constant maintenance. Skilled technicians monitored refrigeration equipment and electrical systems around the clock. Boilers burned coal delivered by truck and stored in basement bunkers to heat the building through winter. Electricity consumption remained enormous. Operating costs stayed high even as revenue declined. Staff reductions reduced expenses. Yet a building of that size required minimum staffing regardless of occupancy levels. In 1931, owner Matt Canner refinanced the property. The original financial projections no longer matched reality. Banks holding mortgages faced their own crisis as defaults spread across Manhattan real estate. Negotiations were tense. The new terms granted temporary relief, but raised interest rates and shifted partial control to creditors. The New Yorker became a burden shared by owner and lenders alike. Despite financial strain, the hotel continued attracting notable guests. Celebrities visiting Manhattan selected it for its modern comfort and central location. Politicians attending events in the city reserved rooms there. European travelers arriving at Hudson River piers found the building convenient and impressive. The guest registry regularly included names familiar from newspaper headlines. In 1933, the inauguration of Franklin D. Roosevelt brought renewed optimism. The New Deal promised government action to stabilize the economy. Banks reopened and emergency programs began. Immediate panic subsided, though full recovery remained distant. Hotels like the New Yorker survived through resilience and incremental advantages. The building was new enough to feel modern, yet established before the worst economic collapse took hold. By the mid-1930s, conditions improved gradually. Occupancy rates rose modestly. Room prices stabilized. Convention bookings remained steady. The hotel was not flourishing, but foreclosure no longer seemed imminent. Management maintained standards to remain competitive. Lobbies were polished. Restaurants served reliable meals. Mechanical systems operated efficiently. Guests received consistent service. During this period, the New Yorker developed a secondary identity. Long-term residents began leasing rooms on upper floors. These were not short-term travelers but individuals seeking permanent accommodation. Some were elderly. Others were professionals who traveled frequently and preferred hotel convenience over maintaining apartments. A few were eccentric figures with sufficient income to sustain hotel life without owning property. Management offered negotiated monthly rates well below nightly charges. A room costing $4 per night might rent for $60 per month under a long-term agreement. Residents gained stability and access to dining rooms and services. The hotel benefited from steady revenue unaffected by seasonal fluctuations. This dual role as both transient hotel and residential building would define the New Yorker for decades. The structure's size allowed both populations to coexist without conflict. Permanent residents occupied higher floors, removed from the constant movement of short-term guests. Separate elevator banks and designated dining areas ensured privacy. The arrangement functioned because the building had been constructed with excess capacity that the Depression made permanent. By 1935, the New Yorker had endured 5 years of economic catastrophe. Profits projected in 1928 had not materialized, yet the building stood active and occupied. Rooms were filled. Restaurants operated. Mechanical systems ran continuously. In a decade that erased thousands of businesses and left properties abandoned across Manhattan, survival counted as achievement. Its reputation evolved. It was no longer the newest or most fashionable address. Wealthier travelers gravitated toward the Waldorf, Astoria, New York, or the Plaza Hotel, drawn by their long-standing social prestige. The New Yorker offered something increasingly valuable during the 1930s: dependable quality at reasonable cost. Amenities that once seemed extravagant had become expected. Radios in every room were no longer remarkable. Private bathrooms became standard in new construction. Ice water on tap shifted from marvel to convenience. What distinguished the New Yorker was solid construction, strategic location, and sufficient scale to remain viable even at partial occupancy. The building could function at 60% occupancy and still meet expenses. Smaller hotels could not survive without near-full rooms. Its size, once considered excessive, became its shield. Empty rooms on upper floors did not halt operations below. The structure was too substantial to collapse under temporary strain. By the late 1930s, stability returned. Occupancy exceeded 70% during strong seasons. Convention schedules filled peak months. The worst of the Depression had passed. The guest registry of this era reflected American prominence. Senators and congressmen selected the hotel for discretion and proximity to Pennsylvania Station, which allowed convenient travel to Washington. Public figures could move through its large lobbies without constant attention. Entertainers also favored the New Yorker. Broadway performers stayed between shows. Musicians appearing at Radio City Music Hall or Carnegie Hall booked rooms during extended engagements. The presence of NBC studios brought radio personalities regularly into residence. Bob Hope stayed there, as did Benny Goodman. The hotel became a gathering place for performers seeking proximity to midtown theaters without the rigid formality of older establishments. Athletes discovered the hotel as well. Baseball teams visiting New York to face the New York Yankees or the New York Giants frequently lodged their players there. Rooms were comfortable, dining facilities accommodated team meals, and transportation to stadiums was convenient. Joe DiMaggio stayed at the New Yorker early in his career. Visiting players who would later enter the Hall of Fame also passed through its elevators and corridors. Staff grew accustomed to famous faces in restaurants and hallways. The building stood not only as a hotel, but as a crossroads of politics. Entertainment, sport, and technology, reflecting a city regaining its confidence while preparing for the uncertainties that lay ahead. In 1936, RCA demonstrated early television technology inside the New Yorker Hotel. Engineers installed experimental equipment in one of the ballrooms and transmitted test signals to receivers placed around the space. The event drew engineers, investors, and journalists eager to witness the next stage of broadcasting. Television remained years away from commercial viability, yet the New Yorker had positioned itself as a venue where the future was previewed. The hotel's mechanical systems continued to impress technically minded visitors. Its centralized ice-water system remained distinctive enough to earn coverage in trade publications. A refrigeration plant in the basement chilled water that circulated through pipes to every floor. Guests turned a tap marked ice water and received water cold enough to require no additional ice. The system demanded enormous electrical power, but delivered uniform results across 503 rooms. Air handling systems reflected similar foresight. Fresh air entered through rooftop intakes, passed through filters and conditioning equipment, and traveled through ducts hidden in walls and ceilings. Exhaust vents removed stale air and kitchen odors. Though not air conditioning by modern standards, the system far surpassed the open windows and electric fans common in most buildings of the era. Service standards remained consistently high. Management understood that reputation depended on reliability. Dining rooms served meals comparable to respected independent restaurants. Experienced cooks prepared food in volumes that would overwhelm smaller establishments. On a typical evening, hundreds of dinners were served across multiple venues. A centralized commissary received bulk ingredients, processed and stored them in basement facilities, and distributed supplies to kitchens as needed. Efficiency controlled costs while preserving quality. Maintaining these standards required a workforce numbering in the hundreds. Housekeepers cleaned rooms daily. Bellhops handled luggage and errands. Front desk clerks processed arrivals and departures continuously. Telephone operators staffed the switchboard day and night, connecting calls and providing wake-up service. Maintenance crews repaired plumbing, replaced lighting, and kept complex mechanical systems functioning. The building operated as a small city sustained by employees, whose efforts often went unnoticed. Labor relations reflected broader tensions of the era. Hotel workers endured long hours and modest wages. During the mid-1930s, employees at the New Yorker organized alongside unions, representing hospitality workers across Manhattan. Management negotiated contracts, establishing minimum pay scales and defined working conditions. Strikes were threatened but largely avoided. Both sides understood their mutual dependence in a fragile economy. Permanent residents on upper floors formed a distinct community within the structure. Some had lived there since the early 1930s and witnessed the hotel's evolution from financial uncertainty to relative stability. Many were elderly, choosing hotel living over maintaining apartments. Others were professionals whose frequent travel made hotel life practical. A few simply preferred the routines and services of a managed environment. These residents developed personal relationships with staff. They knew front desk clerks by name, had preferred tables in dining rooms, and received familiar acknowledgement when requesting services. In return, they provided steady monthly income and rarely created difficulties. Management valued them as dependable anchors, regardless of fluctuations in tourist seasons. The building size also sheltered a less visible population. Its scale allowed individuals to blend into anonymity. Some upper-floor rooms were rented for cash under names that attracted little scrutiny. As long as bills were paid, discretion prevailed. Privacy appealed to those who sought quiet lives, as well as to others with stronger reasons to avoid attention. By 1939, the New Yorker had defined its identity. It was neither the most exclusive hotel in Manhattan nor the newest. Prestige remained associated with the Waldorf Astoria, New York, and the Plaza Hotel. The New Yorker instead occupied a reliable middle ground, offering modern amenities, central location, and fair rates. Senators chose it when discretion mattered more than display. Baseball players and entertainers appreciated comfort without ceremony. Business travelers valued efficiency over spectacle. The building had survived disastrous timing, endured the Depression, and adapted where competitors failed. Radios in every room were no longer remarkable. Private bathrooms had become expected. Ice water on tap was routine. The New Yorker functioned smoothly in a city that valued reliability above novelty. Financial stability returned without the profits once projected. Refinancing shifted partial control to creditors, yet revenue covered operating costs and debt obligations. Empty rooms high above 8th Avenue represented unused capacity rather than impending collapse. Everything shifted again on December 7, 1941. News of the attack on Pearl Harbor reached guests gathered around radios in lobbies and dining rooms. By evening, the United States had entered World War II. Patterns of hotel life changed immediately. Military officers arrived within days. The War Department required accommodations for personnel assigned to headquarters, logistics, and procurement offices across Manhattan. The New Yorker possessed both capacity and location to meet the demand. Rooms once empty during the Depression filled with Army and Navy officers coordinating mobilization. Servicemen on leave poured into New York throughout the war. The city served as both departure point and destination. Soldiers and sailors, with brief respite, sought Manhattan's theaters and restaurants before shipping overseas. The hotel housed them alongside permanent residents and business travelers. Operations adjusted to wartime realities. Food rationing reshaped restaurant menus. Scarce ingredients were replaced with available substitutes. Guests accepted the changes as part of shared sacrifice. Meals might not equal pre-war abundance, yet they remained dependable and professionally prepared. Staff shortages posed greater strain. Young men working as bellhops, maintenance staff, and kitchen assistants enlisted or were drafted. Women stepped into roles previously reserved for men. Female clerks appeared at the front desk. Housekeeping departments expanded their responsibilities. Telephone operators assumed additional supervisory duties as male managers entered military service. The building's hospital floor. originally intended for guest care, expanded its function. Military doctors used its facilities to examine recruits and treat minor injuries. Operating rooms saw heavier use than at any comparable time in the hotel's history. The New Yorker adapted once more, reshaping itself to meet national necessity while continuing to operate as both refuge and crossroads in a city transformed by war. The arrangement benefited both parties. The military gained convenient medical facilities in Midtown Manhattan, and the New Yorker hotel received payment for space that had often gone under-used. Security throughout the building tightened. Military personnel and visiting officials handling classified information required additional precautions. Guards monitored entrances more closely. Room keys were tracked with stricter oversight. Management limited access to upper floors and restricted unnecessary movement through corridors. The building's immense size had always made complete security difficult. Yet wartime urgency brought sharper attention to access control. The NBC studios inside the hotel broadcast war news and government programming. Radio had become central to sustaining public morale and distributing official messages. Performers who once entertained peacetime audiences now promoted war bonds and encouraged enlistment. The studios operated continuously, sending voices across the nation. Millions of listeners associated The New Yorker with the broadcasts that filled their homes. Financial conditions improved dramatically. Occupancy climbed toward 90%. Demand exceeded supply, allowing higher room rates. Conventions returned as industries expanded to meet military contracts. Engineers, manufacturers, and government contractors required meeting space in Manhattan. The hotel's ballrooms hosted gatherings that would have been impossible during the Depression. Revenue finally approached levels envisioned when construction began 15 years earlier. War also brought tragedy to the city. On July 28, 1945, a B-25 bomber lost in dense fog crashed into the Empire State Building 14 blocks south of the hotel. 14 people died. Staff at the New Yorker watched smoke rise over Midtown. The accident underscored that even far from battlefields, war carried danger. The heavy fog that morning left pilots with almost no visibility until impact was unavoidable. The crash occurred only weeks before Japan's surrender. By August 1945, World War II had ended. The New Yorker emerged from the conflict stronger than when it entered. It had housed officers, sheltered servicemen on leave, and adapted to shortages without closing its doors. Occupancy and revenue finally aligned with projections once dismissed as unrealistic. The immediate post-war years seemed promising. Veterans returned seeking civilian employment. Former staff members were rehired, and departments expanded to manage sustained high occupancy. Business conventions resumed at pre-war levels. Industries converted from military to civilian production, fueling rapid economic growth. Through 1946 and into 1947, demand for hotel rooms remained strong. Competition, however, returned as well. Wartime restrictions had halted new construction, but developers now planned projects that would expand Manhattan's hotel inventory. The New Yorker was aging. A structure that appeared cutting edge in 1930 was approaching its 20th year. Mechanical systems required modernization. Interior decor reflected earlier tastes. New competitors would soon open with contemporary styling and updated amenities. The permanent residents who had filled upper floors during the Depression and war were aging too. Some had lived there for 15 years and now required greater attention and services. The hotel continued accommodating them because they provided stable revenue. Yet the demographic gradually shifted toward retirees rather than the earlier mix of professionals and eccentrics. The hotel's reputation evolved in ways management could not fully control. It became known as a place that tolerated unconventional residents. Individuals who paid cash and requested privacy found few obstacles. The hotel asked minimal questions as long as bills were settled. This discretion attracted harmless eccentrics as well as others with more complicated reasons for avoiding traditional housing. By 1948, the New Yorker had operated for 18 years. It had survived the Great Depression and World War II, emerging as a profitable and durable enterprise. Many competitors that opened with similar ambitions had failed. The mechanical systems still functioned. Rooms remained occupied. Restaurants continued serving meals. Yet the building was no longer novel. Radios in every room were standard. Private bathrooms were universal in modern construction. Ice water on tap was convenient, but no longer remarkable. The competitive edge that once distinguished the hotel had narrowed as the industry caught up. The financial structure remained complicated. Repeated refinancings dispersed ownership among creditors and investors with competing priorities. Some favored maximizing short-term revenue. Others urged reinvestment in maintenance and modernization. Decisions often required consensus among parties who rarely agreed completely, making long-term planning difficult. The hotel's future depended on its ability to compete against newer buildings offering modern facilities. Its central location, established reliability, and sheer scale allowed it to serve multiple markets simultaneously. Still, advantages did not guarantee permanence. Deferred maintenance began to show. Paint faded. Carpets wore thin. Mechanical systems demanded upgrades to meet evolving standards. Amid this shifting landscape, the hotel would gain its most famous resident. Nikola Tesla arrived at the New Yorker in 1933 at the age of 77. He was nearly broke and increasingly isolated. The engineer who revolutionized electrical systems through his work on alternating current had spent his later decades proposing ambitious ideas that never materialized, including wireless power transmission and advanced energy weapons. Investors no longer financed his visions. Tesla survived on a modest pension from Westinghouse Electric and the limited support of admirers, who respected his earlier achievements. He had previously lived at the Hotel Governor Clinton on West 31st Street, but unpaid bills forced him to leave. Management at the New Yorker agreed to accommodate him, despite his inability to pay full rates. His name still carried prestige among engineers and scientists, who understood his contributions to modern electrical infrastructure. The arrangement was not purely charitable. Housing a legendary inventor enhanced the hotel's quiet distinction. Room 3327 became Tesla's final residence, high above 8th Avenue, within a building that had risen in ambition, endured hardship, and adapted to every era it faced. The room sat on the 33rd floor, offering sweeping views of Midtown Manhattan while remaining practical for long-term occupancy. It contained a bed, a desk, a chair, and a small bathroom. Tesla required nothing more. He had spent most of his adult life living in hotels, preferring their simplicity to the burdens of maintaining a household. Unmarried and without family in America, his possessions fit into a few trunks. The room cost $2.50 per day, an amount Tesla could not reliably pay. Western Union Company. His former employer covered much of the bill as a form of retirement support. The hotel management allowed delayed payments and sometimes forgave accumulated debt, understanding that evicting Tesla would create negative publicity. He was elderly, harmless, and caused no trouble beyond his inability to pay. Tesla established daily routines that rarely varied. He woke early, dressed in worn but clean clothes, and walked to the New York Public Library on Fifth Avenue. There, he spent hours reading newspapers and technical journals, filling notebooks with calculations and ideas that would never come to fruition. Library staff recognized him and allowed him to occupy his usual seat without interference. Pigeons played a central role in his daily life. He fed them in Bryant Park, purchasing bird seed, even when funds were scarce. He stood among them, allowing them to land on his outstretched arms while speaking softly in Serbian. Observers saw only an eccentric old man, unaware they were witnessing one of the most important electrical engineers in history. Each evening, Tesla returned to the New Yorker, following the same route. He ate sparingly in his room, or occasionally dined at the hotel when finances allowed, retiring early to repeat the pattern the next day. Hotel staff adapted to his peculiarities. Maids discovered stacks of notebooks, filled with calculations and diagrams, leaving them untouched. Tesla was polite but distant, interacting with employees only as necessary. On the morning of January 8, 1943, a maid knocked on room 3327. No response came. The "Do Not Disturb" sign had hung for 3 days, prompting concern. Using a master key, she entered and found Tesla lying fully clothed on the bed, hands folded across his chest, arranged deliberately. The room was orderly. Papers and notebooks sat where he left them. The hotel doctor confirmed he had been dead at least a day, likely of coronary thrombosis. At the age of 86, authorities were notified. The coroner found no signs of foul play. The FBI arrived before noon. Examining Tesla's room and papers, given his prior inclusion on wartime watch lists for claims about death ray devices, they spent hours documenting every notebook, diagram, and sheet of paper. Tesla's nephew, Sava Kosinovich, protested, asserting the materials belonged to the estate, but wartime security concerns overrode his claims. Several trunks and documents were removed under government authority. The Office of Alien Property also intervened due to Tesla's Serbian birth, complicating ownership. The New Yorker management cooperated fully, emphasizing that Tesla had died peacefully of natural causes. The funeral took place on January 12, 1943, at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. A modest crowd attended, including engineers, scientists, and former colleagues. The general public paid little attention as wartime news dominated the press. Tesla was cremated, his ashes initially stored in Queens before eventual transfer to the Tesla Museum in Belgrade. Room 3327 was restored for new guests. Notebooks were seized by authorities, and Tesla's few personal belongings were returned to Kosinovich. Fresh linens and towels were provided, and the hotel resumed normal operations. Guests occupied the room unaware of its history. Staff remembered Tesla as polite and eccentric, but saw him as one among many unusual residents. Rumors spread following the FBI's involvement. Stories of death rays and secret inventions fueled speculation, with some claiming the government had seized revolutionary technologies. Others imagined Tesla had transmitted knowledge telepathically before death. None of these claims had evidence, though they persisted. In reality, the notebooks contained only theoretical calculations and speculative ideas, with no functional devices or working blueprints. By 1952, the government returned most of the seized papers to the estate. Tesla's death gave the New Yorker a place in history that surpassed its architectural or technological achievements. It became the site where one of history's greatest electrical engineers spent his final days and passed away alone in a modest hotel room. The irony was profound. Tesla, who revolutionized power transmission and helped create the electrical grid, ended his life dependent on the charity of a hotel that tolerated him to avoid embarrassment. The New Yorker did not advertise Tesla's connection. Over time, the story spread through word of mouth, and room 3327 gained significance among admirers who visited to witness the site of his death. The hotel itself continued to age. By the mid-1940s, it was 15 years old, and the wartime boom was waning. Competition from newer hotels intensified. Mechanical systems required upgrades, decor was outdated, and amenities that had once distinguished the building were now standard in other establishments. Tesla's presence marked the end of one era for the hotel. It had provided shelter to a legendary inventor during his final years, and that connection would endure far longer than most aspects of the building's history. The New Yorker entered a long period of decline following his death. Post-war promise gave way to the challenges of aging infrastructure, intensified competition, and a financial structure divided among creditors with differing priorities. Occupancy rates dropped steadily through the 1950s, and the convention business that had once sustained the hotel shifted to newer, modern facilities. Business travelers increasingly chose hotels with better locations and more modern amenities. The permanent residents who had occupied the upper floors for decades were passing away. Younger professionals had little interest in hotel living when affordable apartments were widely available. The neighborhood around 8th Avenue was deteriorating. By the 1960s, the area had lost prestige. The garment district remained active during business hours, but streets were often empty after dark. Crime rose, and prostitution became visible on corners near the hotel. Tourists walking from Penn Station to Midtown theaters encountered blocks that felt unsafe after sunset. The New Yorker adapted by lowering standards and rates, accepting guests who could not afford better accommodations. Rooms once occupied by senators and celebrities now housed transients paying weekly. Management asked fewer questions about identification and payment. The building's size allowed it to serve multiple market segments simultaneously. Business conventions still used the ballrooms occasionally, and ground floor restaurants remained operational. But the upper floors increasingly sheltered a population that other hotels would have rejected. Staff reductions continued through the 1960s. The New Yorker, which had employed hundreds during the war, now relied on a skeleton crew, barely able to maintain basic operations. Housekeeping standards dropped, rooms were cleaned less frequently, and repairs were deferred unless equipment failed completely. The building showed visible neglect. Paint peeled in hallways, carpets wore through, and light fixtures went unreplaced. The once proud hotel now demonstrated the consequences of decades of deferred maintenance. Financial crisis arrived in 1967. The hotel filed for bankruptcy protection, and creditors forced a sale. The property changed hands for $12.5 million, a fraction of its original construction cost, even accounting for inflation. New owners promised renovations and investment, but neither materialized. The sale simply transferred the building to different creditors with the same incentives to minimize costs. The 1970s brought deterioration that seemed terminal. Entire floors remained empty. Mechanical systems failed more often than they functioned. The ice water on tap, once a marvel, delivered rusty brown liquid when it worked at all. The heating system functioned erratically during winter, leaving guests to complain about cold rooms and broken fixtures. Management responded with apologies and discounted rates, but made no substantial improvements. Crime increased inside the building. The New Yorker, once a haven for discreet guests, now attracted people fleeing law enforcement or creditors. Drug dealing occurred in stairwells, and prostitution operated from rooms rented by the hour. Security was minimal. Remaining staff were older employees lacking the energy or authority to enforce rules that management no longer prioritized. Several murders occurred in the early 1970s. A guest was killed during a robbery in 1972, and another death in 1974 appeared to be a suicide, though foul play was suspected. Media attention highlighted the building's decline, describing it as a refuge for criminals and desperate individuals. Preservationists debated the building's future. Its Art Deco exterior by Ralph Walker retained visual power, but the interior had crumbled, and millions in investment were needed for renovations. Demolition became a serious consideration in 1975. Developers saw potential for residential towers or office buildings, and the building's Tesla connection seemed insufficient to justify preservation. By 1975-1976, fewer than 200 of the 253 rooms were regularly occupied. Restaurants were closed, ballrooms sat unused, and retail spaces either housed discount shops or remained vacant. Revenue barely covered utilities and minimal staffing. Bankruptcy seemed inevitable, and demolition appeared likely. In May 1976, the Unification Church made an unexpected offer to purchase the property. Led by Reverend Sun Myung Moon, the organization needed facilities to house members and host events. The New Yorker offered enormous capacity, a central location, and a price reflecting desperation rather than market value. The sale closed in July 1976 for $5.6 million, barely half of what previous bankrupt owners had paid. The church acquired a 43-story building with over 2,000 rooms in Midtown Manhattan for less than the cost of constructing a small apartment building. Renovations began immediately. Electrical systems were updated to meet current codes. Plumbing throughout the structure was repaired, and the heating system was restored. Years of deferred maintenance created challenges, requiring millions in investment. The church focused on partial renovation aligned with its needs. Upper floors were converted to dormitory-style housing for members, with minimal furniture and shared bathrooms. Lower floors continued functioning as a hotel, generating revenue and accommodating visitors attending church events. Guest rooms on floors 2 through 15 were renovated with new carpets, updated bathrooms, and mechanical improvements. The result was a hybrid building dormitory, hotel, and event space. Ballrooms and meeting rooms were fully restored for conferences and large gatherings. The church invested heavily in these spaces, while public areas received priority attention over dormitory floors. The exterior, darkened by decades of city grime, was cleaned and repaired. Ornamental details were restored or replaced, revealing Ralph Walker's original Art Deco vision. By 1980, the New Yorker functioned efficiently as a hybrid facility serving multiple purposes simultaneously. Tesla's connection experienced a revival during this period. Engineers and science enthusiasts visited room 3327, and the church acknowledged its historical significance in promotional materials. The room remained a standard guest room, accessible to interested visitors by arrangement. Conspiracy theories about Tesla's death and the seizure of his papers persisted, with some speculating that the church acquired the building to control secrets or conduct experiments. None of these claims had evidence, though they continued to circulate in books and articles. The hotel achieved landmark status in 1982. The New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission designated the New Yorker as a protected structure due to its architectural and historical significance. The exterior could not be demolished or substantially altered without approval, while the interior remained adaptable to the church's operational needs. During the 1980s, the neighborhood improved. Times Square renovations extended toward the garment district, reducing crime and raising property values. The New Yorker's location, once a liability, became an asset. Church ownership stabilized the building through economic cycles that would have destroyed conventional hotels. The organization did not require maximum profit, and breaking even was sufficient, allowing the property to survive when commercial operators struggled. The dual function as hotel and dormitory created an unusual atmosphere. Guests on lower floors shared elevators and lobbies with church members, generally peacefully but occasionally awkwardly. Reviews were mixed. Visitors appreciated low rates and central location, but complained about dated decor and limited amenities. Travelers prioritizing affordability found value, while those expecting modern standards were disappointed. Mechanical systems remained problematic despite renovations. The centralized ice water system was abandoned in the 1990s due to maintenance costs. Pipes were capped and taps removed, eliminating the building's most distinctive innovation. Tesla's legacy grew in the 1990s and 2000s. Portrayed as a misunderstood genius whose contributions had been overshadowed, the New Yorker benefited from this renewed interest, with enthusiasts visiting room 3327 and some specifically booking stays to experience its history. Promotional materials emphasized Tesla, the Art Deco design, and the landmark status. The 2001 September 11 attacks tested Manhattan tourism. The New Yorker's hybrid model provided stability. Church members continued occupying dormitory floors, while the hotel side endured reduced bookings, but remained operational. Recovery took years, and by the mid-2000s, the hotel operated profitably within the church's parameters. The Great Recession of 2008 further tested the model, but the building survived while commercial hotels struggled. By the 2010s, the New Yorker maintained a reputation as a budget option in Midtown Manhattan. Rooms were affordable, but featured dated decor and minimal amenities. Guests understood the trade-off, while luxury seekers were disappointed. Room 3327 remained a point of fascination. Visitors could request it or learn of its significance upon checkout. The room itself was unremarkable, with its importance derived entirely from Tesla's history. In the 2020s, the New Yorker continues to operate as a hybrid facility, serving multiple purposes that allow it to endure economic conditions that would challenge conventional hotels. The building, which opened in 1930 as the world's tallest hotel, survives not through grandeur, but adaptability. It endured the Great Depression by housing long-term residents, World War II, by sheltering military personnel, the 1960s and 1970s by lowering standards and rates, and post-1976 by becoming more than a pure hotel. The irony is complete. The New Yorker, built to showcase American ambition, became historically famous because an elderly inventor died there alone and broke. It avoided demolition by being purchased by a religious organization that valued it for reasons unrelated to hotel operations. The building survives, not because it succeeded, but because it learned to endure failure. Tesla would have understood, having spent his final years in room 3327 doing the same.